Hello, my name is Tom Schaeffer, and I'm pastor of Faith United Lutheran Church in Toledo, Ohio. Now, as we have come kind of out into this kind of emerging into a post-pandemic world, we've begun in-person worship here at Faith United. And with that, I really felt God leading me to what I think is an important series of messages for me to share, and they are on the purpose of the church. Now, for those of you that will be listening online, if you are part of a church, you will certainly see how these are applicable to your situation. If you're not part of a physical church, then these are still important messages for you to hear, because how the church should act is how a disciple of Jesus Christ should act. And so if this is your faith community, as you listen in here, you will still learn something about what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining us for Faith United Online. Our reading today is from Matthew, the 20th chapter, starting at the 20th verse. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked a favor of him. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Declare that these two sons of mine will sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom." But Jesus answered, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will drink my cup. But to sit at my right and left hand, this is not mine to grant, but it is for those whom it has been prepared by my Father." When the 10 heard it, they were angry with the two brothers. But Jesus called them over to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. It will not be so among you. But whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave, just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." About a year ago, we sent out an email to every member of our congregation, and the email contained a survey. The survey was prepared for us by a church consulting group called Church Doctor Ministries, and the survey was entitled Readiness for Renewal. The purpose of the survey was to measure how prepared a church is to do what it needs to do to thrive and grow. The completed surveys here at Faith United were analyzed by Church Doctor Ministries, and there's a lot that our leadership have learned from this. Today, I want to focus on just one of those survey questions. The question was, what is the purpose of the church? There were 4 possible answers. And from what the Bible teaches us, from what Jesus has told us, one of those answers is clearly the best answer. Jesus created the church through his disciples, and he told us on more than one occasion that the purpose of the church is to make disciples. Now, here in our church, and even as I share this with you, what I want you to know is that actually our church scored like many, many churches score. 63% of our congregation said that the purpose of the church is to provide a place of fellowship, to share God's love with one another. Now, there is no doubt that fellowship and love should be characteristics of the church, but they are not the purpose of the church. If they were the purpose of the church, then all any church would need to do is to have potlucks and coffee hours all the time. Now, here's the thing. Outside of worship, there are a lot of churches that's all they do. If you took all the activities of a church and you put them in either a column called fellowship or a column called reaching new people and making them disciples of Jesus Christ, in most cases, the fellowship column would be quite full. Discipleship, not so much. The vast majority of churches in the United States have a purpose problem. So we need to better understand what the purpose of the church is. We need to consider what it looks like to be a disciple-making church. And we need, as churches, to decide if we want to be what we want to be or what Jesus wants us to be. So over the next several weeks, we're going to examine what it looks like to be a disciple-making church, and therefore a disciple. And as we look at that, hopefully we will look at how it might change our attitudes, how it might inform where we want to invest our time and our resources, how it might challenge us to change. So let's dive in. What is the church? What is its purpose? Well, let me just start by saying that from youth, I loved church. I've always loved church. I can't remember a time I didn't love church. When I loved going to church, I loved worshiping in church. And when I grew up, my church was full on Sunday mornings. And we had awesome coffee hours with the best donuts. I loved coffee hour. But I also always thought the church was meant for something more than what I was experiencing. I would read the stories in the Bible and I would dream of a church that was more alive, more like what we see in the Bible. Now here's the problem. We think about those days, often for those of us that are in the church, like the good old days. But there was a problem brewing in the church already. With full churches, we really didn't need to think about going and making disciples. We didn't think about leading people to Christ. We just relied on biological evangelism. Lutherans would give birth to Lutherans who would give birth to more Lutherans, and so the wheel turned for a while. But ultimately, this produced churches full of consumers. We would show up on Sunday mornings and consume the donuts, consume the fellowship, consume the good music, consume whatever the church provided, and we would go home happy and content. And in this way, many Christians succumbed to the sin of gluttony. They're happy as long as the church is feeding them. It's a provider-consumer relationship. And this whole attitude in the church is just completely contrary to everything Jesus represented and everything he wanted for the church. Jesus would not tolerate this attitude among his disciples. Consider the story that we just read about Jesus and his disciples. What this mother was asking for was a position of power for her sons. She wanted people to serve under her sons. She wanted her sons to lord over people. Now, Jesus knows that to sit at his right and left hand is not to be in a position where others are serving you, but where you serve others. The cup that Jesus speaks of is a symbol of his suffering. And so he's asking them, are you willing to suffer? Are you willing to sacrifice for others? Because eventually that will be asked of you. You see, Jesus came to serve others. And so it makes sense that his disciples would serve others. So a disciple-making church is a church that is not about meeting its own wants and needs. It is a church willing to sacrifice for the needs of others. A church committed to serving the needs of others. Just listen to a couple of other stories from Jesus. This is from Matthew, the 23rd chapter. Jesus says this, "But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have only one master, and you are all brothers and sisters. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Christ. The greatest among you will be your servant. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." Or listen to this from John, the 13th chapter. "When Jesus had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. 'Do you understand what I've done for you?' he asked them. 'You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Now, the early followers of Jesus Christ also struggled with all of this idea of serving rather than being served, but they were constantly called back to what it really meant to be the church throughout their existence. St. Paul in Galatians chapter 5 said, "You, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge your sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love." Philippians chapter 2, Paul says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Jesus Christ, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross." We are being called back by God. God is calling you back. You see, we are being something less than the church when all we do is show up to be filled by God on Sundays. Because a disciple serves. The church serves. We make sacrifices to fulfill the purpose of reaching others and making disciples. That attitude of the church has to be at the forefront of who we are as God's people. At the forefront of how the community around Faith United sees us. How people experience us, experience you as a Christ follower. Now you might be wondering, how do I do that? I don't know the last thing about making disciples. Well, here at Faith United, we're going to be exploring something in the months to come, and it's something that I hope to share with you also. It's this idea of what's called fresh expressions of church. New ways of gathering as church outside of the church building. And here's the thing, what we're doing right now is one of those. By choosing to be a part of this community where you will be encouraged to be a disciple, encouraged to go and make disciples. You are being part of a fresh expression. And we're moving ourselves out of this consumer notion as a church into an understanding of going and making disciples, of being God's church that is sent and sent to serve. You see, when the church buckles to the consumer attitudes of our culture and we allow for disciples who just want to be served rather than serve, we become something less, something other than the church Christ intended us to be. And that's not us. That's not what God is calling us to be. We are to be a vehicle for the transformational power of God's kingdom. Our purpose, given to us by Christ himself, is to make disciples. Let that start with you and me, and then let's share it with others. As always, thanks for joining us this week. This I think is an important message for me to be preaching right now, and so I do hope it will speak to all of you who are listening via YouTube, listening online to these messages. That it might encourage you that in your own home churches to explore what it really means to be the church, or if this is your community, that it will encourage you to be thinking about how else might I be a disciple of Jesus Christ in my life other than just tuning in to listen to these messages? What perhaps is God calling me to do? I hope it'll encourage you in those ways. Please feel free to share this message with somebody else. Hit the subscribe button. Until next week, God bless. Keep safe.